Alright guys, Simon here, we're playing Assassin's Creed 2 and it's time to do our architecture tour of Florence. So basically we're going to look at all the buildings and we're going to read about them in Wikipedia. That's basically it, and look at them as well in the game. So let's start off with the city itself, Florence. So let's see what the game has to say about it. Database, locations, Florence, Palazzo Pitti, okay, Firenze. So Firenze was founded by Julius Caesar in 59 BCE. Florentina, as it was called by the Romans, quickly became a center of commerce. After the sacking of Rome in the 5th century, the Ostrogoths took over. Under their rule, the city was constantly under attack from the Byzantines, who sent the population below 1,000. That's terrible. The Lombards came to power in the 6th century, ending the Byzantine assaults. Florence grew to a population of 80,000 in the 14th century, of which 25,000 were working in the wool industry. Interesting. The wool industry. You wouldn't think that would, sustain a massive economy. Not the way, the trading sustained Venice, but, there you go, wool was pretty important apparently. In 1378, a major revolt of the lower class led to the wool combers rising up and seizing the government of the city. Amazing. The progressive radical democracy lasted for less than 2 months before the upper class seized control once more, but the revolt so terrified the rich that a century later it was still discussed in hushed tones, much as the 1960s hippie movement is today. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think the hippies managed to seize control of anything. Although they did, protest quite a bit. They did do a lot. I'm not sure if they managed to do quite as much as the guys in Florence, though. Anyway, the Albizzi family became the de facto rulers after the revolt, worried about the rise of the Medici family, who were newly rich bankers, rapidly gaining influence in Florence. Maso and Rinaldo Albizzi imprisoned Cosimo de' Medici and exiled him in 1433. But Cosimo gained influence behind the scenes and rose to power in 1434, exiling the entire Albizzi family except for Luca, who had been loyal to Cosimo. Luca Albizzi joined the Signoria, the ruling body of Florence, as Gonfaloniere, succeeding Cosimo's old friend Ilario El Dottore in 1442. Under the Medici family, which built impressive public buildings and supported such luminaries as Michelangelo, Leonardo and Botticelli, the Renaissance began with Florence securely at its center. Yeah, so the Renaissance pretty much began in Florence. So that's what the game has to say. Well, that's surprisingly long compared to some of the other articles we've had in the game about some of the other buildings. So that's what the game has to say. And I guess the major landmarks in Florence would be the Duomo and Ponte Vecchio, the bridge over the Arno, that one there, the one with buildings on it. Let's just walk over to the Duomo, or the cathedral, before we do anything else. Because it's a pretty impressive cathedral, it's fairly good. What are these people doing? Getting in my way. Where is that cathedral? Oh, there it is. So you can see the massive dome from a distance, as you can in real life as well. It's a massive, massive building. Alright, so here we are. I guess this is Florence, the Duomo. I mean, the city is not just the cathedral, but it is the biggest landmark in the whole old city there. Alright, so let's see what Wikipedia has to say. Oh, actually, so Florence is there. This is Wiki Maps Florence. Let's see, let's zoom out a little bit, and hopefully the Google Maps will not choke. San Marino says Florence is there, I see. So it's kind of, it's not on the coast. It's unusual for a landlocked city to be, a major city like this. And it's not a major city today, although at that time it was. I guess, before the Mediterranean was secured from the pirates, this the sea routes weren't really safe, and so some of the, so you know Venice was a naval power, but you know you have to have enough of a navy to suppress the pirates before you can actually start trading safely. I think I've said this already. So before that, you know, the land trade routes would be safer and more reliable, and then thus Florence being kind of in the middle here. You know, Rome is here, and then Northern Europe is up there. So it's kind of in the middle of this northern Italy region. So it's well placed. Well placed locally. You know, in terms of Italy, it's well placed, but in terms of Europe as a whole, it's not really all that advantageous. All right, so here's Florence. Is this the old city? So the city limits of Florence is quite big. The old city, really, it's only like here. So here's the other side of the river. So there's the River Arno there. Ponte Vecchio is there. So you can see this is the bridge with the buildings on it. There it is. And then the Uffizi is there, and then the Piazza della Signoria is there with the is that I keep forgetting what this building is called. I'm so bad. So there's the cathedral there. You can see that there's a tower and a dome and everything. So there you go. So old Florence is really like that. That there. You can see how as we move out, there's more trees and things. So you can see that. You can kind of see that this is a lot denser than this, and so the different times, different types of buildings built at different times, and you can see the grid here, which is much clearer than this kind of dense network here. So this would be kind of pedestrian, I guess, focused, and you see how close the streets are together. Whereas this is like more cars, I believe. Let's see, what kind of buildings? Oh no, these are fairly medium rise or medium density sort of buildings. Whereas this is older stuff here, medieval and Renaissance buildings here. So different street patterns depending on what kind of transport you expect. There's a massive train station here and train tracks going that way. So, but that's something else. Alright, so let's not spend too much time here, but there you go. There's Florence there, and if you look at Google image search, you will see the Duomo, you will see Ponte Vecchio. That's pretty much what Florence is to people, and then Arno, the river. There's also there's the Uffizi there. That's also kind of famous. But you can see how the Duomo really dominates the skyline. Like if you kind of just look out across the top of the city, well, there's this massive thing sitting on top of all these smaller buildings, right? So there you go. Alright, so let's see what Wikipedia has. Wow, Wikipedia has a lot to say. And there's the Medicis, there's Dante, there's Machiavelli. Look at this guy. Cheeky bastard. Alright. Alright, so Florence, here we go. Italian Firenze. Alternative obsolete form Fiorenza, Latin Florentina, is the capital of the Italian region of Tuscany and of the province of Florence. It is the most populous city in Tuscany with approximately 370,000 inhabitants, expanding to over 1.5 million in the metropolitan area. So, like, even today, it's a pretty massive kind of city. 1.5 million people in the metropolitan area. Again, it's not a coastal city, like it's not a port city. Like usually big cities are ports, but this one is not. So it's pretty impressive. Florence is famous for its history, a center of medieval European trade and finance, and one of the wealthiest cities of the time. Yeah, so in the medieval period, it's a center of trade, but it doesn't. I guess it's got the river, so I guess that helps. But the fact that it's not on the Mediterranean coast is significant. That during the medieval times, the Mediterranean wasn't really safe enough for shipping, for transporting goods. Florence is considered the birthplace of the Renaissance and has been called the Athens of the Middle Ages. A turbulent political history includes periods of rule by the powerful Medici family and numerous religious and republican revolutions. From 1865 to 1871, the city was also the capital of the recently established Kingdom of Italy. Well, that's much later than the game. The historic center of Florence attracts millions of tourists each year, and Euromonitor International ranked the city as the world's 72nd most visited in 2009 with 1,685,000 visitors, 1.7 million visitors in a year. It was declared a World Heritage Site by UNESCO in 1982 due to Florence's artistic and architectural heritage. It has been ranked by Forbes as one of the most beautiful cities in the world. Yeah, it is. It is, especially the historical center, which is quite well preserved, which is fortunate. I mean, sometimes war and various natural disasters can destroy a lot of historic buildings. But yeah, Florence is remarkably well preserved. I mean, comparable to Venice. As in, what are we up to? The city. The city is noted for its history, culture, Renaissance art, and architecture and monuments. The city also contains numerous museums and art galleries, such as the Uffizi Gallery and the Pitti Palace, among others, and still exerts an influence in the fields of art, culture, and politics. Yeah, I guess. I mean, I don't want to, talk down at a fine city, but it's mostly for its history, not so much for contemporary. Like in terms of modern day achievements, it doesn't quite rank with other cities. Although it's a very beautiful historic city. Florence is also an important city in Italian fashion, being ranked within the top 50 fashion capitals of the world. Top 50 fashion capitals of the world. Okay, top 50. This is not top 5, not top 10. Furthermore, it is also a major national economic center, being a tourist and industrial hub. In 2008, the city had the 17th highest average income in Italy. Probably the tourism trade, because there's a lot of tourists going there, and it's a beautiful city to visit as well. Yeah, it is. It is a beautiful city. It's also a university town, still. So, if you like, the central city is quite pleasant to walk around in and to hang out and to see things. More pleasant than, say, Rome, for example. Like, Rome is kind of crowded and noisy, and it's a bit of a mess, Rome, to be honest, because it's a little too crowded. Whereas Florence, the center of Florence, somehow is just nice. There's plenty of people there, but you don't feel crowded like you do in Rome. You don't feel rushed like you do in Rome. Like, Florence is quite. It's nice. It's a nice city, basically. It's got a nice balance. Anyway, that's my personal opinion of the town as I experienced it. Like, Venice is also nice. You just kind of walk around, there's canals and things, but you're quite aware that it's a tourist trap. Like, it's just a tourist trap. Whereas Florence there's the tourist bits. It's not too rushed. It's not too crowded, but it's a city still. Like, it's a functioning city. It's not just a tourist trap like Venice is. So well, there you go. I mean, I don't know if one is better than the other, but Florence is a nice town. Like, it feels like a nice city to live. Anyway, let's just carry on with this one. So, Florence originated as a Roman. Oh, there's a main article, History of Florence. Wow. Originated as a Roman city, and later, after a period, as a flourishing trading and banking medieval commune. It was the birthplace of the Italian Renaissance, or the Florentine Renaissance. According to the Encyclopaedia Britannica, it was politically, economically, and culturally one of the most important cities in Europe and the world from the 14th century to the 16th century. That's true. The language spoken in the city there during the 14th century was, and still is, accepted as the Italian language, So there's a lot of dialects. Like for example, the Duke in Italian it's Dux, whereas in Venetian it's Doge. So Italian at that time there's multiple languages, multiple related languages that are similar but not quite the same. But Florence being the I guess the preeminent city culturally and economically, it kind of became the de facto capital of Italy, even though Italy at that time was a bunch of city-states, and then there's no unified political regime of any sort. Almost all the writers and poets in Italian literature of the Golden Age are in some way connected with Florence, leading ultimately to the adoption of the Florentine dialect above all the local dialects as a literary language of choice. Starting from the Middle Ages, Florentine money in the form of the gold florin financed the development of industry all over Europe, from Britain to Bruges, to Lyon to Hungary. Florentine bankers financed the English kings during the Hundred Years' War, as well as the papacy, including the construction of the provisional capital of Avignon, and after their return to Rome, the reconstruction and Renaissance embellishment of the latter. It's money. Money makes the world go round, and the Medicis were bankers. Florence was actually like banking. You think, what's so special about banking? I mean, obviously bankers are rich, but the Medicis kind of invented banking. I mean, it seems a bit strange, but we didn't always have banks. The idea that you could, like, people would give you their money, and you would promise to give it back to them when they ask for it, and then you would take that money that they've given you to hold, and you would lend it out to other people, and then you charge them interest. So in doing that, suddenly there's more money in circulation because you're taking money that other people have deposited with you and you're lending it out to other people. So that money, whereas otherwise they would just put it in a chest and then lock it up somewhere and it wouldn't do anything. But the Medici, because they would lend it out to other people, that money all of a sudden was active, like it was in the economy doing stuff. It was being invested in businesses and whatnot. And so the act of taking money from, holding money for other people and then lending that out to other people, that greatly increased the vitality of the economy because the money was being more active. The money wasn't just sitting in a vault somewhere. The money was actually the money that would have been sitting in the vault was being lent out and being put to work and being invested in businesses. Was that did you get that? Like banking, the idea of kind of banking and taking money from some people and investing in other people, and that basically meant that even though Florence may not have been objectively any richer, they don't actually have more gold than another city, for example, but the idea of banking allowed that money to do more work than if it was just kind of put away in a vault. And so then the effective wealth of Florence became more than it would be otherwise. So that's the invention of banking, and that's the contribution of banking to economy, and that's the contribution of the Medici family to the wealth and prosperity of Florence, and why Florence, or what was one of the reasons why Florence became the birthplace of the Renaissance, as it were, because that money, instead of putting it in vault, you would kind of give it to an artist to buy, to invest in artwork, or you can invest in businesses and whatnot. I've said this already, so I won't repeat myself too much. But do you guys understand banking? Maybe you look it up on Wikipedia, like banking. It's not just putting money in the bank. Like there's actually a purpose, or there's actually a positive outcome for a society. Banking. Although bankers are not always trustworthy because they hold a lot of money, and then you have to keep an eye on them, right? Anyway, so Florence was home to the Medici, one of history's most important noble families. Lorenzo de' Medici was considered a political and cultural mastermind of Italy in the late 15th century. Two members of the family were popes in the early 16th century, Leo X and Clement the VII, Catherine de' Medici married King Henry II of France, and after his death in 1559 reigned as regent in France. The Medici reigned as Grand Dukes of Tuscany, starting with Cosimo I de' Medici in 1569 and ending with the death of Jean Gaston de' Medici in 1737. Yeah, so they went from bankers to rulers, because, money and power go hand in hand, right? So the Roman origins. Florence was established by Lucius Cornelius Sulla in 80 BC as a settlement for its veteran soldiers and was named originally Fluentia, owing to the fact that it was built between two rivers, which was later corrupted to Florentia. It was built in the style of an army camp, with the main streets, the Cardo and the Decumanus, intersecting at the present Piazza della Repubblica, situated at the Via Cassia, the main route between Rome and the north, and within the fertile valley of the Arno. The settlement quickly became an important commercial center. So it was on the main Roman road from Rome into into Europe. So before the Mediterranean became the trading route, the Roman roads over the land was the trade routes, and so it was a town situated on a major trade route, and that contributed also to its prosperity. In the centuries to come, the city experienced turbulent periods of Ostrogothic rule, during which the city was often troubled by warfare between the Ostrogoths and the Byzantines, which may have caused the population to fall to as few as 1,000 people. Peace returned after Lombard rule in the 6th century. Florence was conquered by Charlemagne in 774 and became part of the Duchy of Tuscany, with Lucca as capital. The population began to grow again and commerce prospered. In 854, Florence and Fiesole were united in one county. Fiesole? I don't know how to pronounce that. Second millennium, Margrave Hugo chose Florence as his residency instead of Lucca at about 1000 AD. I don't know why that's important. Sometimes Wikipedia is a bit strange, okay, so who's Margrave Hugo? Who is that guy? The golden age of Florence art began around this time. In 1013, construction began on the Basilica di San Miniato al Monte. The exterior of the baptistry was reworked in Romanesque style between 1059 and 1128. This period also saw the eclipse of Florence's formerly powerful rival Pisa, defeated by Genoa in 1284 and subjugated by Florence in 1406. Wow. Poor Pisa, man, got tag-teamed by Genoa and Florence. So these are the different city-states in Italy. An exercise of power by the mercantile elite following an anti-aristocratic movement led by Giano della Bella that resulted in a set of laws called the Ordinances of Justice of 1293. Okay. That kind of needs more elaboration, really, but I guess if you want to, you can read the history of Florence there. So Middle Ages and Renaissance, rise of the Medici, of a population estimated at 94,000 before the Black Death of 1348. About 25,000 are said to have been supported by the city's wool industry. Wow. Wool. In 1345, Florence was the scene of an attempted strike by wool combers, the Ciompi, who in 1378 rose up in a brief revolt against oligarchic rule in the revolt of the Ciompi? After their suppression, Florence came under the sway of the Albizzi family, bitter rivals of the Medici. In the 15th century, Florence was among the largest cities in Europe, considered rich and economically successful. Life was not idyllic for all residents, though, among whom there were great disparities in wealth. Cosimo de' Medici was the first Medici family member to essentially control the city from behind the scenes. The government must be kind of weird. There's no clear ruler. There's just kind of influential families with with influence. Um, what were we up to? Although the city was technically a democracy of sorts, okay, his power came from a vast patronage network along with his alliance to the new immigrants, the Gente Nova, new people. The fact that the Medicis were bankers to the Pope also contributed to their ascendancy. Cosimo was succeeded by his son Piero, who was soon after succeeded by Cosimo's grandson Lorenzo in 1469. Lorenzo was a great patron of the arts, commissioning works by Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and Botticelli. Lorenzo was an accomplished musician and brought composers and singers to Florence, including Alexander Agricola, Johannes Giselin, and Heinrich Isaac by contemporary Florentines, and since he was known as Lorenzo the Magnificent, Lorenzo il Magnifico. So he was pretty extravagant kind of guy. Following the death of Lorenzo de' Medici in 1492, he was succeeded by his son Piero II. When the French King Charles VIII invaded northern Italy, Piero II chose to resist his army, but when he realized the size of the French army at the gates of Pisa, he had to accept the humiliating conditions of the French king. These made the Florentines rebel, and they expelled Piero II. With his exile in 1494, the first period of Medici rule ended with the restoration of a republican government. Oh, that's interesting. So this other stuff is later on. Savonarola and Machiavelli. Oh, this was just in the game. We just did that. During this period, the Dominican monk Girolamo Savonarola had become prior of the San Marco monastery in 1490. He was famed for his penitential sermons, lambasting what he viewed as widespread immorality and attachment to material riches. He blamed the exiles of the Medici as the work of God, punishing them for their decadence. He seized the opportunity to carry through political reforms leading to a more democratic rule. But when Savonarola publicly accused Pope Alexander VI of corruption, this guy had balls. He was banned from speaking in public. When he broke this ban, he was excommunicated. The Florentines, tired of his extreme teachings, turned against him and arrested him. He was convicted as a heretic and burned at the stake on the Piazza della Signora on 23rd of May 1498. Well, there's an exact date for that. It must be quite an occasion if they had the exact date for it. So that kind of happened in the game, not quite the same thing though. But they're using the same real life people and basing the game on real life events as well. A second individual of unusually acute insight was Niccolo Machiavelli, whose prescriptions for Florence's regeneration under strong leadership have often been seen as a legitimization of political expediency and even malpractice. In other words, Machiavelli was a sort of political thinker, perhaps most renowned for his political handbook titled The Prince, which is about ruling and the exercise of power. Commissioned by the Medici, Machiavelli also wrote the Florentine Histories, the history of the city. Florentines drove out the Medici for a second time and re-established a republic on 16th of May 1527. Restored twice with the support of both emperor and pope, the Medici in 1537 became hereditary dukes of Florence, and in 1569 Grand Dukes of Tuscany, ruling for 2 centuries. In Old Tuscany, only the Republic of Lucca, later a duchy, and the Principality of Piombino were independent from Florence. Wow. So, the Medici got kicked out of the city multiple times, but was reinstalled by the Emperor and the Pope. That's the Holy Roman Empire, Emperor, by the way. That's the German one. 18th and 19th century. Do we want to read about this? I mean, this is after the game. So, the extinction of the Medici dynasty and the accession in 1737 of Francis Stephan, Duke of Lorraine, and husband of Maria Theresa of Austria, led to Tuscany's temporary inclusion into the territories of the Austrian crown. Oh, cool. They became a secondogeniture of the Habsburg-Lorraine dynasty, who were deposed for the Bourbon Parma in 1801, themselves deposed in December 1807 when Tuscany was annexed by France. Okay, that's kind of complicated. Florence was a prefecture of the French Department of Arno from 1808 to the fall of Napoleon in 1814. The Habsburg-Lorraine dynasty was restored on the throne of Tuscany at the Congress of Vienna, but finally deposed in 1859. Tuscany became a province of the United Kingdom of Italy in 1861. Yeah, I don't know, I don't really want to read this part because it's kind of after the game and not really gonna be useful to us. Second World War, historic, let's see, maybe this is useful. So, during World War II, the city experienced a year-long German occupation in 1943 to 1944 and was declared an open city. What does that mean? The Allied soldiers who died driving the Germans from Tuscany are buried in cemeteries outside the city. Americans about 9 kilometers south of the city. British and Commonwealth soldiers a few kilometers east of the center on the right bank of the Arno. Okay. In 1944, the retreating Germans blew up the bridges along the Arno, linking the district of Ottrano to the rest of the city, making it difficult for the British troops to cross. However, at the last moment, Charlie Steinhausen, at the time consulate of 26 countries in Florence, convinced the German general in Italy that the Ponte Vecchio was not to be blown up due to its historic value. Wow, so the ambassador told the German general not to blow up the Ponte Vecchio, even though all the other bridges were blown up. Instead, an equally historic area of streets directly to the south of the bridge, including part of the Corridio Vesariano, was destroyed using mines. So that sucks. Since then, the bridges have been restored to their original forms using as many of the remaining materials as possible, but the buildings surrounding the Ponte Vecchio have been rebuilt in a style combining the old with modern design. Shortly before leaving Florence, as they knew they would soon have to retreat, the Germans executed many freedom fighters and political opponents publicly, in streets and squares, including the Piazza Santo Spirito. Oh, that sucks. At the end of the World War II in Europe in May 1945, the US Army's Information and Educational Branch was ordered to establish an overseas university campus for demobilized American servicemen and women in Florence, Italy. The first American university for service personnel was established in June 1945 at the School of Aeronautics in Florence, Italy. Some 7,500 soldier students were to pass through the university during its 4 one-month sessions. CGI American Universities. Okay. 4 one-month sessions. That's not very much. In November 1966, the Arno flooded parts of the center, damaging many art treasures. Around the city, there are tiny placards on the walls noting where the flood waters reached at the highest point. Oh, that's a bummer. Alright, so geography. Florence lies in a basin formed by the hills of Caragini, Fesole, Settigano, Arcatri, Poggio Imperiale, and Beloscado, Florence. The Arno River and 3 other minor rivers flow through it. Okay. Oh, those are hills. It's surrounded by hills with 2 rivers in it, or 4 rivers in it. Climate: Florence borders on humid subtropical and Mediterranean climates. It has hot, humid summers with moderate rainfall and cool, damp winters. Surrounded by hills in a river valley, Florence can be hot and humid from June to August. As Florence lacks a prevailing wind, summer temperatures are higher than along the coast. Rainfall in the summer is convectional, while relief rainfall dominates in the winter with some snow. The highest officially recorded temperature was 42.6 degrees Celsius on the 26th of July 1983, and the lowest was negative 23.2 degrees Celsius. That's a pretty big range. Huh. Uh, anyway, there's the historical center. I'm not going to read all of that subdivisions, that's not really... Alright, main sites, there we go. Architecture of Florence, that's a separate article, in fact. Let's open that and have a look at that later on. Well, here we go. So Florence is known as the cradle of the Renaissance for its monuments, churches, and buildings. The best known site of Florence is the domed cathedral of the city, Santa Maria del Fiore, known as the Duomo, whose dome was built by Filippo Brunelleschi. The nearby Campanile, partly designed by Giotto, and the baptistry buildings are also highlights. The dome, 600 years after its completion, is still the largest dome built in brick and mortar in the world. In 1982, the Historic Center of Florence was declared a World Heritage Site by UNESCO. The center of the city is contained in medieval walls that were built in the 14th century to defend the city. At the heart of the city, in Piazza della Signoria, is Bartolomeo Manati's Fountain of Neptune, which is a masterpiece of marble sculpture at the terminus of the still functioning Roman aqueduct. The layout and structure of Florence in many ways harkens back to the Roman era when it was designed as a garrison settlement. Nevertheless, the majority of the city was built during the Renaissance. Despite the strong presence of Renaissance architecture within the city, traces of medieval, Baroque, neoclassical, and modern architecture can be found. The Palazzo Vecchio, as well as the Duomo, or the city's cathedral, are the two buildings which dominate Florence's skyline. Palazzo Vecchio, that's what it's called. That building I keep forgetting. The River Arno, which cuts through the old part of the city, is as much a character in Florentine history as many of the people who live there. Historically, the locals have a love-hate relationship with the Arno, which alternated between nourishing the city with commerce and destroying it by flood. One of the bridges in particular stands out, the Ponte Vecchio, Old Bridge, whose most striking feature is the multitude of shops built up on its edges, held up by stilts. The bridge also carries Vasari's elevated corridor linking the Uffizi to the Medici residence, Palazzo Pitti. Although the original bridge was constructed by the Etruscans, the current bridge was rebuilt in the 14th century. It is the only bridge in the city to have survived World War II intact. It is the first example in the Western world of a bridge built using segmented arches, that is, arches less than a semicircle, to reduce both span-to-rise ratio and the number of pillars to allow lesser encumbrance in the riverbed, being much more successful than the Roman El Conatere Bridge. I don't know why that's important. Now, the Church of San Lorenzo contains the Medici Chapel, the mausoleum of the Medici family, the most powerful family in Florence from the 15th to the 18th century. Nearby is the Uffizi Gallery, one of the finest art museums in the world, founded on a large bequest from the last member of the Medici family. Oh, wait, last member? Wait, they're gone? For good? Huh. So the Uffizi means offices. It's like the office building, or the government office building of Florence. It's been turned into an art gallery now, and it is quite impressive. It's also quite crowded and with a lot of tourists in it. The Uffizi is located at the corner of the Piazza della Signoria, a site important for being the center of Florence's civil life and government for centuries. The Palazzo della Signoria facing it is still home to the municipal government. The Loggia dei Lanzi provided the setting for all public ceremonies of the Republican government. Many significant episodes in the history of art and political changes were staged here, such as in 1301, Dante was sent into exile from here, commemorated by a plaque on one of the walls of the Uffizi. Why is that a commemorated? He's sent into exile from here. Interesting thing to commemorate. On the 26th of April 1478, Jacopo de Pazzi and his retainers tried to raise the city against the Medici after the plot known as the Congiura del Pazzi, the Pazzi conspiracy. Oh, this was in the game. We killed those guys. Murdering Giuliano di Piero de' Medici and wounding his brother Lorenzo. All the members of the plot who could be apprehended were seized by the Florentines and hanged from the windows of the palace. Pwned. So that was kind of in the game, even though in the game, Ezio did everything. But that was actually a historical event of some sort. So the Pazzi tried to kill the Medici, but it didn't really work. In 1497, it was the location of the bonfire of the Vanities, instigated by the Dominican friar and preacher Girolamo Savonarola. That was also in the game, kind of. On 23rd of May 1498, the same Savonarola and two followers were hanged and burned at the stake. A round plate on the ground marks the spot where he was hanged. In 1504, Michelangelo's David, now replaced by a replica since the original was moved in 1873 to the Galleria dell'Accademia, was installed in front of the Palazzo della Signoria. So Michelangelo's David, do you guys know that statue? It's a pretty cool statue. It's probably one of the most famous statues in the world, and you can see David's penis if you want to. Actually, is this still penis still hanging out, or have they covered it up? They covered it up in some paintings, I think. I'm pretty sure the original is he just standing there, butt naked. If you're interested. The Piazza della Signoria is the location of a number of statues by other sculptors such as Donatello, Giambologna, Aminati, and Cellini, although some have been replaced with copies to preserve the originals. Wow, look at, there's like more articles, architecture in Florence, and then this list of churches in Florence, and there's theatres in Florence. So much stuff to read. I'm not going to read all of it. So Florence contains several palaces and buildings from various eras. The Palazzo Vecchio is the town hall of Florence and also an art museum. This large Romanesque crenellated fortress palace overlooks the Piazza della Signoria, with its copy of Michelangelo's David statue, as well as the gallery of statues in the adjacent Loggia di Lanzi. Originally called the Palazzo della Signoria after the Signoria of Florence, the ruling body of the Republic of Florence, it was also given several other names: Palazzo de Popolo, Palazzo de Priori, Palazzo Ducale, in accordance with the varying use of the palace during its long history. So it's like the Palace of the People, the Palace of the Priori, which is like the first citizen, I guess, and then the Palace of the Duke. The building acquired its current name when the Medici Duke's residence was moved across the Arno to the Palazzo Pitti. It is linked to the Uffizi and the Palazzo Pitti through the Corridoio Vesariano. So there's like a corridor that bridges across the streets, and it links the three main buildings in the city. Palazzo Medici Riccardi, designed by Michelozzo di Bartolomeo for Cosimo il Vecchio of the Medici family, is another major edifice. It was built between 1445 and 1460. It was well known for its stone masonry that includes rustication and ashlar. Today it is the head office of the Florence province and hosts museums and the Riccardiana Library. The Palazzo Strozzi, an example of civil architecture with its rusticated stone inspired by the Palazzo Medici, but with more harmonious proportions. We're probably going to look at all these buildings in the game. Today the palace is used for international expositions like the annual Antique Show, founded as the Biennale dell'Antiquariato in 1959, fashion shows and other cultural and artistic events. Here also is the seat of the Istituto Nazionale del Rinascimento and the noted Gabinetto Viuso, with the library and reading room. I don't know how to pronounce these things. Aside from these palaces and buildings, there are several others, including the Palazzo Rucellai, designed by Leon Battista Alberti between 1446 and 1451 and executed, at least in part, by Bernardo Rossellino. We killed Alberti in the game. The Palazzo de Vanzati, which houses the Museum of the Old Florentine House, the Palazzo della Assicurazioni Generali, designed in the Neo-Renaissance style. Okay, this is later on. So these are the later buildings, which you're not going to look at. Wow, this is really long. This is really, really long. I don't think I'll read. It's just basically a long list of all the famous buildings in this city. We'll go through all of this stuff. Although this might be important. The squares and streets and parks, that's not really dealt with in the game as well as the buildings. Like, a lot of people, I've said this before, like they assume that buildings are important, but actually the open spaces are also important in the city, and in fact sometimes the squares are more important than the buildings around the square. Anyway, so aside from such monuments, Florence contains numerous major squares, piazzae, and streets. The Piazza della Repubblica is a square in the city's center, location of the cultural cafes and bourgeois palaces. Along the square's cafes, like Cafe Gilly, I don't know if I should read this. Nah, you can read it if you want. It's basically just a list of things for you to look at if you're visiting Florence. Demographics, economy, tourism is by far the most important of all industries, and most of Florentine's economy relies on the money generated by international arrivals and students studying in the city. Students and tourism. So yeah. Manufacturing and commerce, however, still remain highly important. Florence is also Italy's 17th richest city in terms of average workers' earnings, with the figure being €23,000. The overall city's income is that of €6.5 billion. So this is modern Florence. I don't think it talks about historic Florence here, so we're not going to read that, although you can if you want. So culture, art of Florence. So that's the Uffizi there. So the gallery rooms are like to the right there. There's the sculptures in the Loggia de Lanzi. There's some paintings in the Uffizi. I'm not gonna this is really long. There's a bit of architecture here, but we're gonna read about it in the individual buildings anyways. I'm gonna leave that until later. So let's see: literature, music, cinema, cuisine, research activities, science and discovery, fashion, historical evocations. Okay, it's all very cool, but I'm not going to read any of that because that's not really about the game anymore. Notable residents, so a lot of stuff for you to look at again, if you want to. That's Lorenzo there. That's Machiavelli. They don't really look like they do in the game, do they? Especially Machiavelli. Look at this guy, that cheeky bastard. It's much more serious in the game than that. Architecture of Florence. Oh, it's just a list. A list of main architectural works in Florence, Italy by period. Oh wow. Look at all this stuff. Romanesque, Gothic, Renaissance, late Renaissance and Mannerism. What was that? 17th century? Oh, 17th century, Rococo and the Habsburg-Lorraine period. Neoclassicism. The facade of the Duomo was actually neoclassical. It's not even... the Duomo itself was old, but the facade is quite new. Reconstruction of edifices near Ponte Vecchio. Modern 21st century. Alright, so that's just the list. We're not going to look at a list of things. Okay, well that's the city itself.